Hello everybody, I'm Todd Jackson. I'm back again with honeybees, diseases and pests, also known as doom and gloom. There's a lot of fun and excitement that goes on in beekeeping, but there's also some downside to it. So being able to protect your bees from the different diseases and pests that you may encounter is paramount in your success as a beekeeper. Honeybee brood and adults are attacked by bacteria, viruses, protozoa, fungi, and parasitic mites. Disease and pest control requires constant vigilance as a beekeeper. So, kind of going back to the samurai, you need to know your enemy, you need to know his sword. You need to know what your enemy is using against you. So, to know the enemy's sword is to basically know how to defend yourself. Alright, so let's start big. We're going to start with American foulbrood. This is the number one, the worst thing that can occur in your hive, and it's a bacteria that forms highly persistent spores, and they infect the larvae, and the larvae change from a pearly white to a brown, and then after they're capped, the cappings are perforated. So one of the keys to checking if you think you have American foulbrood is to take a stick, toothpick, and place it through into the capping and swirl it around. If it comes out brown and ropey, kind of like snot, it's probably American foulbrood. So that's the number one indicator. This stuff is really bad, and if you have it or even think you have it, you need to contact the Virginia State Apiarist Keith Tigner, and it's included in the slide. It's got the phone number and the email, and they will definitely, somebody will be there as a state inspector. Keith Tigner himself may show up to verify that you don't have American foulbrood. So let's go into some of the other aspects of American foulbrood to help you guide you along. So with American foulbrood, you'll find that you'll have a scattered and spotty brood pattern. And as we go through a lot of these other diseases, you'll see that spotty brood pattern is kind of indicative of things not right in your hive. So cappings are sunk and perforated, and it has a greasy appearance. The larvae are dull, and if you take a stick and thrust into it, it's going to be sticky and ropey, and it's going to have a unpleasant foul odor. So this is American foulbrood. This is what it looks like if you had a frame, you pull a frame out. This is actually American foulbrood. You can see the cappings, there's holes in them, they're perforated. You can see that kind of brown, greasy areas. And it's a spotty brood pattern. Again, spotty brood pattern is kind of key throughout all of this. Next on the list is European foulbrood. European foulbrood is a bacterial disease of the larva, and unlike American foulbrood, the larvae affected with European foulbrood die before they are capped. Infected larvae are twisted in the bottom of the cells, change from a creamy color, and have a smooth melted appearance. Because European foulbrood do not form persistent spores, this disease is not as dangerous as American foulbrood. Colonies with European foulbrood will sometimes recover on their own after a good nectar flow begins. Some of the signs, again, spotty brood patterns. Cappings are sunk or perforated or discolored. The larvae are yellow, tan, brown, or dull. But when you stick a stick into the cell, they does not come out ropey, and there is a sour smell. And this is what European foulbrood looks like. And you can see the larvae in there. They kind of have a smooth, glassy, kind of melted look in the bottom, and the spotty brood pattern. Another disease you may run into is chalk brood. Chalk brood is a fungal disease of the larva. Infected larvae turn chalky white in color, and they become hard and then eventually turn black. Chalk brood is most frequent during damp conditions in early spring. Colonies usually recover on their own. Some of the signs are scattered spotty brood pattern, capping sunk or perforated or discolored, larvae are white and moldy and later turn hard and chalk-like, but there is no foul smell. It's basically a normal smell. And this is a picture of a frame with chalk brood on it, and you can see a few of the cells, you can actually see the larvae are chalk white in it. And again, spotty brood pattern. Something else you may run across is nosema. Nosema is a protozoan disease of adult bees. Damp, cold conditions encourage this disease, discouraging nosema by selecting areas that have good airflow. In spring, infected colonies will build up slowly or not at all. Bees appear weak and may shiver and crawl on the ground aimlessly. Brown stains on the front of the hive are from dysentery, and this is indicative of the possibility of having nosema, but the only way to verify you have nosema is actually to test for nosema. Alright, on to pests. Tracheomites. Tracheomites are microscopic mites that enter the trachea or breathing tubes of young bees. Inside the trachea, the mites block the air exchange and pierce the walls and suck blood from the walls of the trachea. Symptoms resemble that of nosema. Bees become weak, crawl around at the entrance of the hive, and sometimes uncouple their wings so that all 4 wings are visible. Now, this actually is my wife's favorite subject, Varroa destructor, because she said that when we go to beekeeping meetings, this is all they talk about is Varroa mites, which I think she's right. So she's like, are we going to the meeting and we're going to talk about Varroa mites again? I was like, I don't know. But anyways, this is probably the #1 pest you're going to deal with in your hive, and this is going to separate you from a beekeeper and a bee haver. So the mites, they're the size of a pinhead. They're copper color. The female mites cling to the adult bees and suck the fatty bodies from the bees. The females enter the brood cell and produce several offspring that in turn suck the fatty bodies of the developing bee. The infested colonies usually die within 3 or 4 years unless they are treated. Adult bee viruses associated with Varroa destructor. The bee pictured there is gut deformed wing virus. This is one that's easily discernible from the list that's there. And again, these are there's a whole large list of viruses that come with a hive mite infestation in your hive. So there's 3 failing strategies when dealing with Varroa mites, and this is from Randy Oliver. He's a well-known beekeeper. Number 1, your theory is denial. I haven't seen any mites, so my mite levels are low. That's setting yourself up for failure. Wishful thinking. I haven't seen very many mites, so I'm hoping and praying that my bees are going to be okay. Still not a winning philosophy. And then blind faith. I've used the latest snake oil mite cure, and it's got to work. All 3 of these will set you up for failure when dealing with Varroa mites. So, one of the key things to do is being able to monitor your Varroa mite populations to adequately address the issue you have at hand. So there are 2 ways to sample for Varroa mites. One is the powdered sugar method or the sugar roll, or the alcohol wash method. First of all, you need to collect a sample of bees. You need 300 bees in a sample. Now when you sample your bees, you need to be very careful for when you sample. You need to get bees from the brood nest, where the nurse bees are. Now, the key to that is, again, being careful is the queen's also right there in the brood's nest where all the nurse bees are. So when you get your sample of bees, you've got to make sure the queen's not in with your sample, especially on the second method, which I'm going to tell you about. The first method, probably not the best choice, but again, you shouldn't be sampling your queen in your Varroa mite count. So 300 bees, which is equivalent to about a half a cup of bees. Ready. All right. The first method we're going to talk about is the powdered sugar shake method or the sugar roll. This method works well if you don't want to kill any bees in the process. So you're going to take your 300 bee sample, you're going to put 2 tablespoons of powdered sugar into the jar, and then you're going to place a lid on it with a screen on top of it, and then you're going to shake the bees gently, slowly, rolling the bees that are covered with sugar for approximately 1 minute. Now you want to do this every time consistently, so your time should be consistent every time you do this. You're going to set the jar down for about 3 to 5 minutes. You don't want to put it in the sun. Keep it in the shade, because if not, the bees are going to get all hot and sticky, especially in the hot summer sun, and it's going to take the bees and turn them into a ball of mush. So at that point, you're going to invert the jar and shake it like a salt shaker, capturing the falling mites onto a clean plate or pan below. I actually stole my daughter's Frisbee for this one. You're going to shake the jar until the mites stop falling out. Then you're going to take a bottle with a spray bottle, and you're going to spray the powdered sugar on the plate with the water until the sugar dissolves, and then you'll be able to see the mites. Then you're going to count the mites that remain. Then you're going to add an additional tablespoon of sugar, shake the jar for additional 30 seconds, and then you're going to repeat the steps again, let it set, and then you're going to shake it out. on the pan, spritz it with water, and do your final count on the mites that you find in your pan. Now, with this, you're going to divide the number by 3. So if you have a jar of 300, you want to do a mite count per 100 bees. So if there are 9 mites in this pan, you're going to divide it by 3, so your mite count is 3, or 3%. So it's 3 per 100. At this point, you can take the bees and return them back to the colony. Alright, the second method, which actually is probably more accurate than the sugar roll method, is the alcohol wash method. This method, your bees will die in this process. And again, this is paramount that the queen is not in this sample. I can't go over this enough. So you're going to take your 300 bee sample, pour alcohol into it, isopropyl, 70%, and then you're going to put your lid on there, shake it a little bit, swirl it around, let it set for a little bit, give a chance for the alcohol to kill the bees. This one here, if it's a hot day in the sun and I don't want to spend a bunch of time in the bee yard, I can do a bunch of samples, set them aside, and then take them home and have ice cold refreshing adult beverage in the air conditioning and do mite counts. So again, these bees are dead once they hit alcohol. So you're going to take the jar, invert it, dump the alcohol out, and you can dump the mites in, and again the same calculation. With this sample, say that you had 300 bees, the mites that were in the alcohol was 12. You're going to take your 12, divide it by 3. That means you have 4 mites in your drop, which is 4 mites per 100, so your mite load in this case is 4%. Alright, interpreting the findings. Now, as you look at the chart, different portions of the season you may encounter different mite loads. And depending on what's going on in the season, a higher mite load count may be a little more acceptable, but again, having the least amount of mites in the colony is preferred. As the colony builds up, the mite load starts to build up. As the bee population starts to drop off, the actual mite is increasing. So in the springtime, your mite load will be definitely lower than it is during the fall portion of the year as the bee colony population drops off. So this is where integrated pest management comes in. So as we look at this integrated pest management, we're going to look at the way to control the mite population in your colonies. So we start at the base, which is culture. Then it's mechanical, then it's soft chemicals, and then it's hard chemicals. So again, basically it's prevention, intervention, and as we move up this pyramid, it increases in toxicity. So you must understand there is more than one way to the top of the mountain. So this is another summary. So when we do pest management, I'm going to go over a bunch of methods, and you need to mix these methods up, find out which one works best for you, which works in your bee yard. So let's start off with cultural controls. Apiary location, believe it or not, is kind of a key step in what's going on with your mites in your colonies. My bees in Chesapeake actually have a higher mite count than my bees out in the country in Windsor. So more bees around, people not taking care of their bees, not doing pest management, that could be leading to your bees having a higher concentration of mites. So genetic stock is another cultural control. VSH bees, Varroa sensitive hygienic, they basically remove the larva, the actual cap, open the caps and pull out the pupa that actually have Varroa mites, and they remove them. Another is the Minnesota hygienic bee, another bee that is good genetic stock. And then Russian bees. Russian bees are another bee that has a propensity for being resistant to Varroa mites. So let's go to mechanical and physical controls. This is the next level on our integrated pest management. Screen bottom boards. Screen bottom boards allow the mites to drop out of the colony as the bees are moving and rubbing up against each other. It dislodges mites, so this allows them to drop off and drop out of the colony. Another method is drone trapping. Drone trapping, and going back to my original analogy that to know your enemy is to know his weapon. Well, the mites prefer to reproduce in drone cells. So using drone foundation and allowing the bees to draw out drones, the mites will be attracted to the drone foundation and the drone cells because the drones give off a special pheromone and the mites are attracted to that. Another method is brood break interruption, to actually cage the queen up for a week and stop the actual reproductive cycle of the queen, and it basically cuts down the areas where the mites can reproduce. Also, requeening kind of goes hand in hand with brood interruption, but requeening, and again, you can requeen with a queen that has genetics that help reduce the mite population. Next is thermal treatment. Thermal treatment is a method where you heat the hive to approximately 106 degrees Fahrenheit for a specified time duration, and basically what that does to the mites is it makes the mites sterile. It doesn't kill the mites, but it makes them sterile and unable to reproduce. So, chemical controls. Now, when you're working with chemicals, it is paramount that you check and then recheck the labels on the safety precautions that go along with these chemicals, because a lot of them are definitely hazardous to your health. And again, if you've worked with these chemicals quite a bit, you still need to go back and check to make sure that you're handling them correctly. Make sure that you have the specified protective clothing and the equipment required. Again, safety is paramount. So next on the list is essential oils. Apiguard or thymol is one of the essential oils. Next on the list is Apalifar, which has thymol, eucalyptol, menthol, and camphor. As we go up the list are the acids. Mite-Away Quick Strip, which is formic acid. Formic Pro, which is also formic acid. HopGuard 2, which is hop beta acids. And then oxalic acid. Then there are synthetic chemicals. There's Apistan, which is a fluvalent, and Checkmite, which is Coumaphos. Now, one thing said about this is these two chemicals are almost ineffective against mite control nowadays. That people did not switch up their mite control philosophy and just kept bombarding their bees with one chemical. And again, these are on the higher end of the list. They're a little bit more harmful to the bees. But again, these have been used extensively, and the mites have kind of grown resistant to both of these. So you may want to avoid them. And then the last on the list of hard chemicals is Apivar or Amitraz. And this one is still effective, but again, this goes back to varying your mite treatments, changing up your arsenal against the mites, and basically keeping your game different so that you can dispose of the Varroa destructor. Next on the list of pests is small hive beetles. Adult small hive beetles search for honeybee colonies, and they slide into the host colony, try to be undetected, and they hide in cracks and crevices. Now, small hive beetles will seek out where there's ample supply of honey and pollen, and that's where they try to reproduce. But again, if you have strong colonies, they should be able to take care of these pests. But if they get out of control, this is what a hive beetle problem looks like after the larvae have hatched. This is basically slimed. These frames are no good. The bees don't want anything to do with these frames that have been slimed. They're full of larvae, beetle defecant. These are non-useful. You might as well throw these away. All right. Next on the list of pests is wax moths. So a lot of people say my hives died from wax moths. Actually, truthfully, the wax moths are actually the cleanup crew for a failed job at being a beekeeper, truthfully. I actually think that wax moths have a purpose in life, and that's to remove old wax, to clean up dead and dying colonies. If a bee colony, a feral colony in a tree comes to its surmise, the wax moths show up, they clean out that cavity, and it's ready again for another colony to actually move back in. But wax moths are basically the cleanup crew for poor beekeeping practice. So what they do is they come into the hive. If there are not enough bees there, they will overwhelm, and you'll see streaks of wax moths eating through the comb, and basically as it progresses, your colony is going to meet its demise. And this is what a frame of comb looks like after it's been fully infested by wax moths. So wasps. Wasps are another insect that's out there, and they actually Usually they're peaking around the end of summer, beginning of fall. That's when the wasp population increase, and they actually try to sneak into the hive, and they try to bum rush the door and get in, and they actually start to remove larvae from the hive to feed their young, and they try to get through the defenses of the colony. So this is one thing that you'll have to keep an eye out for, especially in the late portion of the season. Bears. Actually, that's a picture of one of my colonies that actually met up with a bear. A friend of mine said, "Hey, I got a great location for a colony." And I said, "Outstanding, a place to put a colony." Well, let me tell you, the edge of the Dismal Swamp may not be the best place. So bears, they usually show up at night. Again, they said, "Hey, we haven't seen bears in years." Well, the key is they come out at night, so you don't normally see the bears. And another thing is they overturn the colony, tear it apart, and they eat the brood. Actually, kind of that Winnie the Pooh thing's throwing you off. They're not really after the honey. They're after the brood. The brood is nothing but protein. So the honey's kind of like that follow-up snack, but they're truthfully there for the brood. And I actually had to go through the woods a couple hundred feet out as I was picking up the frames. Plastic frames, the bears had licked them completely clean, nothing left on them. They cleaned them up for me and went through the woods, scattering frames throughout the woods. The best protection against bears is an electric fence. Now the key to the electric fence is put it there before the bears arrive. If the bears have actually attacked your hot colonies and tore them apart, they kind of probably may go through the electric fence because they already know that there's a pot of gold at the end of the rainbow. So the fence up prior to a bear arrival is key. Raccoons and skunks, they're actually nocturnal visitors that show up at your hive. And they scratch on the entrance, causing the guard bees and other bees to come out of the hive. And you'll have indicative sign of that is the skunk scrat or the raccoon scrat, which is feces which actually have chunks of bees in them. And that is a sign that you have those nocturnal visitors. Also, scratch marks at the front of the hive. Another sign may be that your bees are a little irritable when you go out there in the morning to work with them. So they may have a little bit of upsetness because they've had visitors at night. So one way to help the bees out is to raise the colony up so that if the raccoon skunks are up there scratching at the door, their underside or their belly is exposed and allows the bees to sting them and helps deter them. Next on the list, mice. Mice usually gain access to active hives in the autumn when the colony is small and bees are forming a cluster. Once inside the hive, they can feed on the stores of honey and pollen and make a nest. The way to prevent the hive is to reduce the entrance size or use a mouse guard. This will help reduce your possibility of having those unwanted pests. Any questions?